Back here on the Cover 3 podcast, live on CBS Sports Network. Well, the big time game on CBS this Saturday, 3:30 p.m. Eastern Time. We'll be looking at Minneapolis as Penn State goes on the road, trying to add another win against a team with a winning record to its college football playoff rankings profile, trying to avoid what could be a costly second loss. But don't look, that Minnesota team has caused some problems for some teams throughout the Big Ten this season. So if you are Penn State, Bud, what are you looking at as the places where you need to dominate? Where do you need to impose your will as one of the best teams in this conference? What are the opportunities for that against Minnesota?
I think you got to be able to get the run game going. Teams have been able, like the better teams have been able to run the football this year on Minnesota, but like some of the lesser teams have not. Penn State thinks it's one of the upper teams as far as running the football. I generally agree with them. You might have to have Drew Aller loosen up the run game a little bit with some of the pass game stuff, but I think Penn State sticking with the run game here, eventually popping some explosives off that run game like they did against USC is going to be critical for them. And I do think over the 60 minutes they should be able to wear Minnesota down.
I agree. I'd love to see them get the backs going. I know they've been a little bit banged up, but once again, last week, the leading rusher was, again, Tyler Warren. And Tyler Warren has been awesome for them, but I don't think that's necessarily a recipe for success to have him be both your leading rusher and your leading receiver. Receiving's fine. We know he's a weapon as a tight end. And then it was Bo Pribula, who was the second leading rusher, comes in late, gets some rushing yardage. But I'd like to see them get Nick Singleton and Katron Allen going a little bit more, where you're a little bit more traditional run-based attack, and you sprinkle in Tyler Warren as some wildcat, and you kind of use him a little bit more of a traditional tight end type of weapon. He's not traditional in any sense of the word, as he's been an unbelievable athlete, an unbelievable weapon. But I do feel like this is the type of game you want to oppose your will a little bit more with the run game. So I totally agree with Bud. And we were talking about Drew Aller before. It's something we didn't necessarily see against Purdue. Again, that game was pretty much in hand from the get-go, so it wasn't like you needed to see a lot. But the receivers, they're always a question mark. Like, let's see those receivers make some big plays, even if you don't get the explosive necessarily 100 or 150-yard wide, receiving day from the receivers. Let's see them make some big catches, some big plays, critical third downs, red zone catches for them so they can be a more complete team. I think that's the way we look at Penn State every time we talk about them and judge them. It's not based specifically in this game against Minnesota. It's what are you going to need to do to take that next step to become an elite team in college football so you maybe get a home playoff win or you advance another round. In order to do that, I'd like to see them round things up a little bit more well-rounded on the offensive side of the ball.
Okay, so what about that Minnesota side of this? Because this is a team, remember, they were frisky against Michigan in the Big House. Then they go on a nice little run. They get the win against USC with some late game dramatics. They get the win against UCLA. They beat Illinois in a game that kind of felt like they were really starting to break through, and then just lay an absolute egg against Rutgers. Big, I guess it's an Ethan Kaliakmanis revenge game, Kirk Shiraka revenge game. Choose your own storyline or narrative there. But they get an off week, right? They can just flush what happened in Piscataway and try to turn your attention to getting Penn State in your house in this game. Danny, what are the things that Minnesota is preaching to its team right now? What are the things that Minnesota could do to be able to give themselves the best chance possible to pull off an upset that would be extremely college football, if you ask me?
Yeah, absolutely it would. I think this is a really tricky spot for Penn State. I mean, the 2-touchdown point favorite. You're looking at it. You're supposed to win this game. Is there a chance that Minnesota, who was sitting there at 6-3 with a chance to be 7-3, might have overlooked a road trip to Rutgers because they were anticipating this game? I think there is. I mean, it is human nature. You win 4 games in a row. You're starting to feel pretty good. You start looking ahead. You just assume you can walk, into Piscataway and get the big win. I think that had as much to do with it as anything, but they're getting pretty solid quarterback play. They're getting pretty evenly balanced attack. I think this is one where Penn State needs to be really careful with it. As much as we talked about the offensive side of the ball, I do think Penn State's defense needs to step up and impose their will against Max Brosmer for Minnesota. Make sure you kind of keep him in check. Make sure you don't let him get too comfortable in the pocket, because he's been quarterback who, when he gets hot, can definitely hurt you at times. So you just want to make sure he doesn't get too comfortable in that pocket, and make sure you just keep him on his toes.
Totally agree, Dan. I think Brosmer is actually one of the more underrated quarterbacks in this conference. And I think one of the things he's had to do this year is try to look to guys other than Daniel Jackson. Everybody came into the season knowing Jackson's going to be the stud for Minnesota. If you take him away, do they have anything else? And at times the answer has been no. But at times the answer has been yes. And I think Max does a really good job of actually scanning the field and finding the open guy and seemingly not caring. He doesn't just force the ball to Jackson all the time, like a guy like Ethan Kaliakmanis did, several years ago when he played for Minnesota. They had like one dude catch 1 million balls, right? Brosmer will spread it around some. I think that's going to be really key, because Penn State should and probably will try to take away Jackson to the best of their ability.
Yeah, do you think that, because when I'm looking at this matchup, I know that Penn State is so good up front, and that their hope is that we're going to get so much pressure on Brosmer. We're going to speed him up. We're going to get him off his mark. All of a sudden it's going to be very difficult for the downfield passing game to really develop. Like, Bud, do you think Minnesota's offensive line is built to be able to hold up here?
Not necessarily. This is something I think I have a bit of concern about. If you look at who Minnesota has played, right?
Right.
Who really has great speed rushers who they've faced? I think it's, for the most part, like North Carolina, which was week 0, and then not a ton of other elite speed rushers. I mean, Iowa has some guys that are kind of speed to power. UCLA this year is better on the interior, not necessarily the edge rusher types. USC was really banged up when they played, if I recall. Maryland this year is a little bit down on the defensive line. Illinois got a couple guys, but they're not quite as good as maybe they have been in recent years. Rutgers was really banged up as well for that one. So the last time that we really saw elite pass rushers rip off the edge against this Minnesota team was that North Carolina victory there at Minnesota. So I don't know if they've answered. That was 10, 11, 12 weeks ago now. But how much quicker are these offensive tackles than they were then? Because North Carolina gave them problems.
Yeah, I would probably add Michigan is probably more interior than speed rushers on the outside as well. So similar blueprint right there. All right, Danny, let's you mentioned it earlier, right around 2 touchdowns, over under around 45.5. What kind of leans would you have for this game? Of course, with our locks coming on Thursday.
There were 2 games last week that I feel are similar to this one. You had Oregon on the road at Wisconsin, and you had in the SEC, Texas on the road at Arkansas. Both of those games were tighter than everybody thought, and I would expect this one to be a similar game. I think it'll be tighter than people think. I kind of like Minnesota to keep it close. It's interesting how much pressure starts to ramp up. Everyone starts to pucker up a little bit tighter. People start to call games differently. Like, do you risk this game? Do you want to just play it safe? And you get a little bit more conservative calling plays or dialing up blitzes because you don't want to screw it up. And when you do that, that's when kind of funny things start to happen. So I think this is a tight spot for Penn State. I think they're the better team. I think they'll win, but I think it'll be one that they might be sweating in the second half and potentially the fourth quarter.
Denny, I agree with you. I mean, this is a tighter spread than Ohio State, Indiana, right? Everybody's like, can Indiana pull the upset? Like, can Penn State avoid getting upset here? I do think Minnesota has a pretty good chance to keep it tight for a while, mainly because the style of football that they want to play, right? They're going to run the clock down to almost nothing. They're going to run the football a lot with Darius Taylor and just see if they can keep it close and win a coin flip in the end. It's going to be on Penn State to break it open if they can. So I kind of think, closer and lower scoring, probably.
Yeah. We always play the game, what's the number? I think the number's 27. Like, if Penn State gets to 27, then it might be out of reach given, what Minnesota's offense has been for most of the year, what Penn State's defense is, and everything that we do. Like, a hot start would go really, really far, I think, for Penn State. But at the same time, don't let this thing. I mean, we already got the days are getting shorter. Don't let it be cold. dark.
Right?
All of a sudden, Minnesota gets a little bit of confidence. You got Max Brosmer rowing the boat with the celebrations. Yeah, just
DJ Fleck sprinting up and down the sideline. He's sprinting up and down, fired up.
Chip,
yeah, I think Brosmer will be one of the better quarterbacks they've played.
Have you seen the weather for this? Don't let it get cold.
Oh, no.
It's going to be 32.
Ooh. What's the feels like? That feels like when the sun goes down, too.
Yeah, listen.
It's going to be dark at 4:00.
Right, exactly. I understand Penn State's very used to playing in cold weather environment, but when you're on the road, the blood pumps a little bit warmer when you are in your own home stadium. Fired up to watch this one because I agree, Bud. For everything that's being made of the game at noon, the can Penn State land this plane is incredibly intriguing once we get into that afternoon slate. Kickoff at 3:30 p.m. Eastern time. You can watch it on CBS, America's Most Watched Network, the network of stars. You can stream it on Paramount Plus, a mountain of entertainment. It is Penn State at Minnesota. Well, coming up on the other side, we've got the college football playoff rankings release on Tuesday. Just some of our general thoughts on what we might be expecting or looking for there, plus our players to watch for Week 13. Next.